They don't want to do something that is going to bring the conflict directly to Iran. That's something they have tried to avoid for many, many years, which is why they have cultivated this network of proxies around the region. So I think they're trying to balance, on the one hand, feeling like they need to do something in the wake of this attack on their embassy compound in Damascus, but also trying to find something that won't further escalate what is already looking like a regional conflict.
How serious would you say a development such as a seizure of a ship linked to Israel is?
I think it's getting a lot of attention because of the circumstances right now, because of this concern about an Iranian response for that strike in Damascus. But it's also the sort of thing that's been happening off and on, not just for the past 6 months, but for many years now. So the ship, it does have a link to Israel through its ownership by an Israeli billionaire, but it's a ship that was leased out to MSC, a company headquartered in Switzerland. It was operated by MSC. It was carrying goods from the UAE to India, and there are not thought to be any Israelis on board the vessel. So it's a very tenuous link to Israel. And I think this is not the sort of retaliation that everyone has been waiting for. This is of a piece with what Iran and its allies have been doing in the region, again, not just since October 7th, but for years now.
Nonetheless, IDF spokesperson Hagari seemed to suggest it was an escalation. Do you think the tenuous nature of the links will give the Israelis, I suppose, cause to say, well, we don't have to respond?
I don't think this is the sort of thing that would merit an Israeli response. This is what both the Israelis and the Iranians have sort of described for many years as the shadow war that's ongoing between them. We've seen over the past 6 months the Houthis in Yemen, an Iranian-backed group, they have attacked a number of ships that they say have links to Israel. Some do, many don't in the Red Sea and going through the Bab el Mandeb Strait. That hasn't drawn any sort of response from Israel. And I don't think this is going to either. I think we're all still waiting to see, and the Israelis are waiting to see how far the Iranians go, whether they, as some hardliners in Tehran have suggested, carry out a direct attack on Israel, whether they choose to attack via their proxies. I think the full scope of what they do will determine what Israel does or does not do in response.
Yeah, I mean, so far, I mean, despite the escalating rhetoric, Greg, no move by the Iranians. And let's recall what the supreme leader said earlier this week. He said Israel was a evil regime and it must be punished, and it shall be. Do you think they haven't done anything yet because of those warnings, very clear warnings from Washington and Tel Aviv, and all the behind the scenes arm twisting, including by Britain? Or is it because they're really not sure what to strike?
I think it's a mix of both. I think they aren't sure what they want to do. They have several options, one of them being a direct attack, a missile or drone attack on Israel. Another one being attacking via their proxies in the region, groups in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, all of which have attacked Israel over the past 6 months. Or they could also strike at Israeli interests abroad. They could attack Israeli embassies, for example. There's been a concern around that. And it's something the Iranians have done before, and Israel has closed some of its foreign embassies over the past 2 weeks because of those fears. So the Iranians are weighing these options, and I think they're trying to figure out what they can do that won't elicit a retaliatory strike from Israel or perhaps even from the United States or Western powers. They don't want to do something that is going to bring the conflict directly to Iran. That's something they have tried to avoid for many, many years, which is why they have cultivated this network of proxies around the region. So I think they're trying to balance, on the one hand, feeling like they need to do something in the wake of this attack on their embassy compound in Damascus, but also trying to find something that won't further escalate what is already looking like a regional conflict.
Can you describe in a bit more detail why they might be so concerned about a retaliatory strike on Iranian soil? What kind of assets, what kind of facilities might they fear being hit?
I think they have two concerns. One is broadly that Israel would strike at either military targets or critical infrastructure in Iran. Obviously, hitting either one of those would do serious damage to the government, to the Iranian economy. And that would come at a moment when there's also a political transition looming in Iran. The supreme leader is old, he's not well. At some point in the next few years, he's probably going to die, and there will be a transition. And what we've seen in Iranian politics over the past few years is they've really been trying to consolidate power in preparation for this transition. And they don't want to do anything that might damage their armed forces, damage their security apparatus, and perhaps open space for opposition elements who want to challenge the regime. So that's one concern. And then a more specific concern, I think, is that Israel has been talking for decades about attacking Iran's nuclear sites. And it hasn't done that. One reason it hasn't done that is because it's worried that if it does, it will trigger a response from Iran or its proxies around the region. But I think there's an understanding or a concern in Tehran that if they attack the Israelis directly, if their proxies attack Israel in a bigger way than they have, Israel might not feel deterred anymore. It might go ahead and attack Iran's nuclear facilities, which Iran has invested a lot of blood and treasure in building up over the past few decades. And they're worried about that outcome, and they want to make sure that it's not going to happen.
And Greg, while all this power play and geopolitics is happening at 33,000 feet, on the ground in Gaza, people are continuing to die. And I think the head of USAID has agreed with UN that famine has now visited the north of Gaza. What hope of relief for the people there? What hope of an easing of tensions thanks to diplomatic wranglings, thanks to talk of a ceasefire? Because that seems to have gone away.
There's a lot of talk about it, but there's not a lot of action on the ground. When you talk to Palestinians in Gaza, they say it hasn't translated to much. So if you look at the numbers from the past week, there are more trucks getting across the border into Gaza carrying aid, where previously you had usually less than 200 trucks a day entering. In recent days, you've had 300, 400, close to 500 trucks getting in. Problem is, more aid is going in, but there are still big issues with distributing it, with finding trucks and drivers and warehouses and a logistical network to distribute aid within Gaza. Similarly, we've heard talk from the Israelis about opening a new border crossing in the north to allow aid to enter from there, allowing aid to flow by sea through the port of Ashdod, which is less than an hour's drive away from Gaza. That hasn't translated to anything yet. The Americans are talking about setting up this floating jetty in Gaza that could receive large shipments of aid by sea directly into Gaza, but it's going to be a few more weeks, possibly more than a month, until that is done and aid starts flowing. So there's a lot of effort, there's a lot of talk in diplomatic circles about what can be done to get more aid in, but many of those plans are still weeks away from coming to fruition. And again, even when more aid is getting into Gaza, there's a big problem getting it from where it enters to the people who actually need it.
And meanwhile, the more time goes by, the less chance of getting a significant number of hostages out alive.
It's true. There are still ongoing talks in Cairo and in Doha about a 6 week ceasefire deal that would secure the release of about 40 hostages. That deal was meant to free certain categories of hostages: women, elderly people, sick people. Hamas has said in recent days that they can't find 40 hostages in those categories who are still alive. They've said they would have to release dead bodies if they were to meet that. And so there's been a lot of back and forth between them and the Israeli government about exactly which hostages are going to be released. It's thought that already of the 130 or so hostages who are believed to be in Gaza, about a quarter of them are confirmed to be dead already, according to the Israeli government. The real number might be higher than that. And with every day that goes by without a deal, without a hostage release, the chances of them coming back alive
Yeah.
are dwindling.